When I'm talking to black kids specifically, I say to them, understand who you are and your place in the world and how valuable you are, because you're an Aboriginal person, a First Nations person, and you are part of the oldest living culture in the history of mankind. And that's something that no one else can take away from you. And you need to be proud of that, and you need to understand that how powerful that is and how important that is and how important our culture is, and learn as much as you can about it and share that with your friends, share that with your family, share that with your children, because we need to be able to maintain our people and our culture. Understanding that is a good thing, and it really can set you up in terms of being a confident person and really being able to understand your place and your space and who you are in the world.
Welcome back, Funky Fusters, to another episode of The Few with me, Boo, and the legendary Sean Sewell. And this is our first podcast out of lockdown, Sean, down in these parts.
Well, down in your parts, yes, for Sydney, absolutely. So great to be back. Great to see you back at home, away from the farm again, and getting out and about.
Yeah, I'm having urban shock, being back amongst traffic and living life outside of the bubble. I think I quite like living in that virtual world to some degree. So it's but it's certainly nice to get out and about. You're back from the Northern Territory. You're obviously only a few days away from purchasing a property somewhere up there, Tennant Creek wise.
Well, yeah, some of the government guys that I met up there as part of October Business Month did 4 keynotes, went to and from NT 3 times in 3 weeks. So that's been a bit of a hike, but it was great. But they said, we're going to call you a temporary NT resident, given that I spent so much time there. I spent 2 months in the NT this year already. So yeah.
Nice to see you in the NT, mate. Okay, guys, super excited about today's guest, who is well and truly living a deeper purpose, and I guess using that deep purpose to drive his business as an entrepreneur into well and truly into the few stratosphere. So really excited to have TEDx speaker, entrepreneur, advocate for all things reconciliation. We today have on the show Dion. Dion, now, it's always an issue with vowels. Devow or Devow?
Devow.
Devow. Mate, welcome so much. Thanks for joining Sean and I on the Few today, mate.
Thanks, Dion.
So tell us a little bit about your journey. What was it like being Dion when you first started to realise that life was happening around you? The young, the restless.
Young and the restless. Well, speaking of Darwin in the Northern Territory, I'm actually from Darwin, born and bred, and my parents moved up there when my mother was 8 months pregnant with having me, because in those days, we're talking about the early 70s, late 60s, it was quite racist in Queensland. So they heard that the Northern Territory was the better place for Aboriginal people to thrive and have education, employment, and so forth. So I grew up in Darwin. It's my hometown, even though my country is in northern Queensland. On my father's side, we're Aboriginal, and we're traditional owners of the Mumbara people, which are a group of islands off the coast of Townsville, called Palm Island, and on my mother's side we're Torres Strait Islanders. So my country's in Darnley Island in the Torres Strait, and Palm Island, northern Queensland. But I grew up in Darwin, so I had quite a good, strong, fairly religious, strict, but very loving family. I came from that, and so I was very good at sport when I was young. Went all around the country representing the Northern Territory for athletics. By the time I was 13, I'd been all around the country. So we weren't rich and we weren't poor, but my parents were hard workers, and so I always had a good sense of myself. And being brought up in a Christian home, I always had faith and really leaned towards that to do and strive to whatever it is that I wanted to do in life. And because I was quite good at sport from an early age and did quite a lot of traveling, especially for a black kid, from Darwin, with a lot of other Aboriginal kids actually traveling the country, you had kind of a little bit of a different experience and a different outlook on life than maybe others, maybe other even non-Indigenous kids. But I had a good sense of myself from a very young age, and always had my faith to fall back on. So I had a bit of, not that I'm a very confident person, but I use my faith to give me confidence and to kind of strive for things that I thought that I couldn't do myself. I relied on that to get through. So, you know, yeah, just an answer to your question, I kind of not really sure, but I had a good sense of myself from a very early age, and had a lot of direction from my parents around what might be the best ways to achieve in life, and that was firstly through education. Although even though a lot of our people are good at sport, you know, you can't rely on that, and I'm glad that I didn't, because I didn't fully use the gift that God had given me in that field. I probably could have went on and done something really special and achieved quite a lot in that area, but I didn't, unfortunately. So I've had to do things, use other gifts that I've been blessed with, but education was a big part of that. So I left the Northern Territory when I was in my late teens, after I'd finished school, to go to university, because I'm the son of a teacher, and was drummed into me from a really early age that education was key. And especially back in those days, my mother was, even when I was growing up, she was a cleaner, but worked part-time and studied part-time for 8 years to become a teacher. And I really saw how, you know, even though we weren't poor, it really changed the socioeconomic status of our household overnight by her attaining a degree. So I had really kind of first-hand experience of seeing how an education can change people's lives, especially from that, you know, a household perspective. And so I moved away to Canberra and attended university. I graduated with a Bachelor of Applied Science and Health Education in 1998, and I've lived in Canberra ever since. But I think that was kind of the grounding around the things that I have achieved in life, because I kind of always thought I was okay academically, but I was quite lazy. And so I never really tried very hard at school. And because I thought I was going to be this Olympic athlete, I thought, well, I'm not going to need school. I'm going to go to the Olympics. I'm going to represent Australia for athletics. And that obviously never happened. So I was glad that I had that drummed into the back of my head around education being something that could really set me up for life. And so that's what I've done. And it's been the basis, that degree has really been the basis of everything that I've achieved, because it's shown me that I can, you know, put the time and effort into completing something that really gives you a little bit of a head start in life. And I think that more and more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are starting to see that and using education as a way to thrive.
So you mentioned
at a base level.
You mentioned Dion, that you know, getting the degree kind of was the foundation for, you know, progressing you forward. So once you finish that degree, you know, maybe give us a little bit of an indication of, you know, where did you move forward then? I mean, obviously you have, you know, business and things now as well, but did you first move into, you know, to be employed with somewhere, or did you jump straight into the fire, so to speak, and get into the world of entrepreneurship?
No, I worked as an Aboriginal health worker for 15 years. So I worked in Aboriginal health. I worked in hospitals and social work departments. I did a little bit of policy, and then I went over to justice. I ran what they call the circle sentencing courts here in Canberra. They're Aboriginal specific courts. They're all around the country, and those courts are all about reducing recidivism rates for Aboriginal people in the justice system. So you work with the magistrate and a group of elders to come up with culturally appropriate sentencing options for Aboriginal defendants instead of throwing them into jail, especially for petty and minor repeat kind of charges. And then I ended up working at the Australian National University in the Jabal Centre, which is the Indigenous support centre for Aboriginal undergrads and postgrad students at the Australian National University. And I wanted to work there because it was ranked #1 in the country at that time. I think maybe 5th in the world, and really wanted to help, you know, people the way that I was helped through the Ngunnawal Centre, which is the equivalent of that at Canberra University when I was an undergrad. So I really kind of enjoyed working there, and was able to give back, I think, a little bit to our youth and our up and coming, you know, doctors and lawyers and archaeologists and anthropologists and all these amazing, they're professionals today, because this is going back, you know, 11 years, but, you know, it was really interesting. But that's where I kind of fell into business, because I, at the time, was looking for some, and I travelled extensively as an Aboriginal health worker across the country promoting health promotion programs for government departments through a contract that I was working closely on with a friend and other Aboriginal people over a period of 3 years. And I just saw, the clothing, the promotional materials that we were wearing, how that really resonated and connected with the Aboriginal people and communities that we went to, because it had Aboriginal design and themes and colours and so forth. And I thought, oh, when I come back home and when I come back, I'm going to look for some Aboriginal clothing online, because it kind of really gives you a sense of pride when you're wearing something. It doesn't matter what you wear, if you're wearing something that looks good and makes you feel good, and just makes the day that much better. So I was looking for this Aboriginal clothing online, and this is going back over a decade, and at that time there wasn't many Aboriginal clothing labels around. There's probably 3 in the country at the time, and so I looked online. I thought, oh, none of them were really my taste, because I've got my own kind of style and whatever. And had a good sense of style, and so I thought, well, because there's nothing online, I might just create my own. And so I worked with a graphic artist and came up with about 10 different designs and got them printed up and sold them to friends and family. And it resonated with them as the idea resonated with me about, wearing cool clothing with Aboriginal design, colours, art, symbolism and language. So again, it was kind of just about me finding something that I could wear and feel comfortable and really promote being a First Nations man. But it resonated with other people in the community, and so then I got a basic website, and that kind of was the start of the creation of my first business, Darkies Designs, and I purposely called it Darkies Designs because I've always been really proud of the fact that not only am I Aboriginal, but I'm dark skinned, and growing up, I'd get a lot of, I'd get teased a lot because I was always the blackest one in the room, and which is fine. It's like, this is from my own mob, and that was cool. But I kind of thought, well, why are they always giving me crap about the fact that I'm dark? I love being black, and there's no mistaking. It's like, and don't get me wrong, I wouldn't really care what shade of black I'm, but we all come in different, colors and shades, and so dark is kind of a bit of a way to say, well, I'm Aboriginal, but I'm also dark skinned, and I'm really proud of that. And I think most Aboriginal people are, and some of the designs that I've created over the years have really given people, especially Aboriginal people that are lighter skinned, the opportunity to be able to promote the fact that they are Aboriginal without saying it, and having people question that. And so one of the designs that I had was one of the first ones. It said something like 100% Australian, and it had like just Australia with the Aboriginal colours kind of superimposed over that design, and it was really something that a lot of our people, again, the lighter skinned Aboriginal people, really kind of loved that design, because it's like, I think sometimes maybe they get sick of explaining to people that just because that they're light skinned, that they're not fully Aboriginal. And I think that that's a really kind of offensive because you're either Aboriginal or you're not, right? So, if you think about other races, if you're Italian and your mother's white, your father's Italian and your mother's white, they're never asked, well, how much percentage Italian are you? Yet when it comes to, people of colour, always kind of ask questions like that are actually quite offensive. So, it was kind of a way to educate, to start conversations. Even the name Darkies, like, what people say, well, how can you even call it that? And it's like, well, it's also about negating making it historically, that word was reclaiming it,
demystifying it, making it
So and it's taken a long time. If I had named the business Devow Designs, I think it would have been a lot more successful a lot earlier. And there are over time, the market's flooded now with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander clothing labels and so forth, and I think that's great. And there's probably businesses that have superseded anything that I could have imagined to do with respect to my label. But I think that, there was a message that I was trying to portray in the beginning. It was a bit about fun. It was a bit about, education. It was a bit about pride, and really valuing, Aboriginal art and culture and language as something that everybody should participate in and embrace. and be comfortable in wearing. And I think over the last decade, I've seen so many more non-Indigenous people feel more comfortable about wearing and using and embracing Aboriginal culture and language and art. And I think that was one of the things that I really wanted to see within the label as well.
Is that part of what you'd say is your purpose is with the brand to help people to feel more comfortable and connect and engage?
Definitely. I think initially it was more about helping Aboriginal people to feel more comfortable and proud and about the fact that we are, Indigenous and sharing that through the clothing that we wear. But as the years have progressed, I think that it's now more a kind of generic, and that there's still that the want and then the want within the business and the purpose to do that, but also I would really like to see more and more non-Indigenous people really feel more and more comfortable about wearing Aboriginal designs without second guessing themselves, and saying, oh, I'm not Aboriginal, can I wear this? So because if you're thinking it about it from a business perspective, I mean, we only make up blackfellas. There's 3% of the population, maybe. So if I'm only selling to them, I'm not going to make any money. So do you know what I mean? Like, I'll still make money, but we want to be able to, broaden our horizons and expand to all of Australia, so that everybody is supporting Aboriginal businesses and everybody is buying Aboriginal themed and designed and owned products, and businesses have become such a big thing in the last, say, I think 5 years from what I've seen. When I was in business, there was hardly any blackfellas that I could talk to about business. Now there's more and more, and that's because of things like the Indigenous procurement policy and the fact that we are now becoming valued within business sectors across the country because of these policies that have been developed and implemented to make sure that we have a fair go and we are included, in business.
Dion, can I unpack that a little bit? I mean, in a perfect world, it wouldn't matter, what our backgrounds were, the color of our skin, but unfortunately, there's this blanket of ignorance that is part of being a human being, and bringing awareness to that and being affirmative in the way that that society engages any minority. Can you maybe give us some insights? You mentioned really early on in the piece that your family relocated from Queensland to NT because of racism, right?
Yes.
So what was your experience with that? And it's a powerful driver for you now, but what was the feeling inside the family unit, and what was the sense of the barriers that were in place? I mean, you must be so proud of your mum, and what an incredible woman to invest that time and effort into getting a degree and becoming a teacher. That's phenomenal. And that must have been huge for you as a role model. But did you have a sense of the issues around racism, and how do you deal with that within your friendship group, your family group, and like what did it feel like?
I was fairly lucky in Darwin in that, I'm not saying that it's not racist, but that racism doesn't occur there. But again, going back to the reasons as to why my parents moved from Queensland to the Northern Territory, because they heard on the Black Grapevine that Darwin was a better place, and that it wasn't as racist, and they were 100% correct. I don't think I would have achieved the things that I've achieved in life had I grown up in Queensland, and I don't think that my parents would have been so successful in their lives as well.
Did you experience it in your travels? You said you're pretty well travelled as a kid. You're all over the country. Was there ever a sense of it?
No, I think because I think when I think we were kind of quite novel, the black kids that were representing this, the Northern Territory for athletics and going around to these different places, and we'd be always the ones that journalists would come and want to interview and take photos of, because a lot of us were running, but we were running bare feet. We didn't have spikes because we didn't have the money. So I didn't really. We got attention, but it wasn't really negative. And again, there were incidents of racism growing up in the Northern Territory that I experienced, but none that I could think of that were really for me, like that really shocking, because it's very multicultural. A lot of non-Indigenous families marry into Aboriginal families. There's Greeks, there's Italians, there's Filipinos, close to Asia. There's a lot of Asian influence, Portuguese, Timorese, so I didn't, people kind of stuck to their groups in high school, but there was also the opportunity for us to, really celebrate who we were. We all knew who we were, and, there were kind of some factions and little bit of friction growing up, but for the most part, I think, and because there's so many Aboriginal people, there was a real sense of solidarity, and we kind of all stuck together and supported each other, and didn't really have to isolate. Or whereas Aboriginal kids and students, I think from in other areas down south, the population's not as dense when it comes to the kind of community. So I kind of feel like seeing my kids, even though their mother's non-Indigenous, they're still, very identifiably Aboriginal, and people of colour. But at their schools, there's not a lot of Aboriginal people. They all went to private schools, and so and even the Aboriginal kids that were there, a lot of them weren't, notably Aboriginal. They're quite fair. So it's been very different, I think, for my children. But I think we're also lucky very much because we're based in Canberra, that everyone here is so politically correct and very well educated. So even my children have been lucky in the sense that we haven't really had the racism that my parents grew up with, or even their cousins or my cousins that they experienced growing up in different parts of the country, like Queensland, which I think today is still. I can feel the tension and it's just a very different place when you're talking about. It might be a look. It might be you're standing in a shop and you're overlooked by someone standing next to you. They get served before you. You're followed in a store. All of that racial kind of what do you call it? Racial
Discrimination.
My mind's.
Yeah.
It is discrimination, but there's another word for it. Profiling.
Profiling, yeah.
You know what I mean? I feel like you just racially profiled a lot more in other places than the ACT or the Northern.
Do you think the fact? Do you think the fact that Dion, that you had I suppose a fairly you didn't have a lot of really negative experiences around people being discriminatory or racist or whatever it is? Do you think that's helped to create? Because you come across as someone who's very accepting, very open, very understanding of anyone, irrespective of race, creed, skin color, whatever it is.
Yep.
Do you feel that not having been exposed to a lot of the negative stuff might have contributed to how you see things now?
I think maybe, and maybe it's more of my upbringing, because again, don't get me wrong, I have experienced racism and it's not nice. Sometimes it's more overt than covert, but I can't get away from it because I'm black. So wherever I go, I'm racially profiled. You know what I mean? And I do remember being followed around from store to store in Darwin as a 9-year-old. I was buying presents for my parents' birthdays that were coming up soon. They're 2 days apart. So I was going from Kmart to Coles, where we had two shops. Came up to go, I was looking for stuff, and there was this woman following me, and I'm thinking, what is she following? Who do I know her or something? Anyway, I was halfway outside Coles going back to Kmart, and she pulled me up and identified herself as a store detective, and I had to show her all the things that I'd bought, and I had to produce receipts, and and I thought, well, that was weird, but so not a good thing. I was thinking, lucky I didn't steal, because she was right on me. I have experienced, and I said, I think I asked her why was she asking me these questions about whether or not I bought something, and she said, "Oh, we were looking for someone that had your description." So obviously a black kid around about my age, you know what I mean? So it's just like, hello in Darwin, every second person looked like me, The population of Aboriginal people up there is, fairly high. So, but in saying that, that wasn't that bad, but I do remember being assaulted by a police officer when I was 14, just because I was standing with a group of Aboriginal people outside this Handicaps, it was called. It was like a takeaway shop that kids used to hang around. It wasn't very late at night, but he just came up with his baton and just struck me with it, like in the stomach. So, these things do happen. The stories that I've heard of my friends as teenagers being picked up by the coppers, thrown in the paddy wagon and taken out bush, and then having to walk back from down the track, or they're being thrown in paddy wagons, because like a lot of us kids used to hang around the streets. It was Darwin in the 80s, boring, so we used to just go out, there was no one ready to go, so just hang around the streets and stuff, whatever, but they'd chuck us in people in paddy wagons and then take them for drive really recklessly and drive over the islands in the streets, so that these kids are being thrown around in the back of the paddy wagon. Do you know what I mean? So I wasn't ignorant to the incidents of racism, but I just kind of feel like I was very lucky in terms of not being exposed as an individual as much as other people I knew anyway. But I always have had a positive look on life. I think it does have to do with looking at people as with love.
Yep.
Even the ones that even loving your enemy, you know what I mean? Like, that's hard. And I think as a person, like, I'm not young, I'm not old, and I had some success. There's a lot of, once you get a little bit of success, people come at you. It's that tall poppy syndrome. And so, it's really hard to look at people that are clearly out to tarnish or affect your reputation in a negative way. It's really hard to look at them with love as well. So it's not only racism, it's kind of that sort of stuff too that can occur, especially if you're black and you have the success. Sometimes you get that from people that you wouldn't necessarily think that you would, and that meaning your own people. So
there's one thing that I was taught,
and that can be really hard.
One thing I was taught from one of my past mentors, which was, that concept of loving or understanding somebody else, so you can understand them, which means that it's not a negative thing, but you don't have to accept their behavior.
Yes.
So as long as because accepting is making it okay. We don't want to make it okay, right. But if you understand that, okay, that person's got this paradigm, that person's ignorant, or that person is whatever their story or their background, their beliefs are, we can understand it. We don't have to accept it and take it on as something that we carry.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a fine line between, turning the other cheek and really, understanding what it is, but also standing up for yourself and saying, I don't need to take that from you. And sometimes that means cutting people out of your lives, and I've had to do that a lot.
Yep.
But that's okay. Like, I think it's as you get older, when you're young, you think, you got to be popular, you got to have people surrounding you, and the more friends are better. It's really, that's not really reality.
No, it's quantity. It becomes quality versus quantity. And I think early on, because we're trying to find who we are, we're attracting people that are a broad set of values. But as we narrow down to our own values, okay, that person doesn't fit with my values anymore. And it's not that you don't like them, or they just don't fit anymore. And
it's really hard. They're really hard to find sometimes. It's like people that are on the same page and have the same beliefs and ethics as you, and don't envy you, or they want to support you, and just that aren't hard work. So I don't think anybody should be, I don't think friendships should be hard work. So
no.
And marriages, because you have to, that's your part, and you put the time, you make the time and the effort to do that, because that's a commitment, but I think for friends, and relationships outside of that, if it's hard, then I think you just need to really rethink, well, is this good for me or them? Maybe just say, see you later, bros.
We both got to get something from that. If it's a give and take situation, then it's time to exit.
Who has time for that stuff? I certainly don't. It's like, I've flat out scratched it. So, but does that answer your question? I can talk a lot. It's very long-winded sometimes.
So, Dion, you're starting to spread yourself wider and wider here. You've got your IT business. You're also now a consultant helping businesses with their reconciliation action plans, helping other Indigenous businessmen and women figure out how to get into that market. You speak a bit more. What do you see as some of the biggest barriers to understanding when it comes to reconciliation? Are people fairly positive and embracing everywhere you go? Are there elements where people are like, what are we doing this for? What's some of the experiences, and what can we learn, like, as a population around the importance of reconciliation, and how to be conciliatory in our approach to the First Nations people?
Look, I think there's a little bit of that. I think there's a little bit of ignorance. I think there's a little bit of uncertainty. I think there's a little bit of self-doubt when it comes to, but there was also a lot of goodwill. People just don't know how to do it. So when you're talking about reconciliation action plans, I think organizations and businesses understand now that, where they're providing programs or services to that particular part of the community, which that being First Nations people, that it's probably a good framework to have in terms of being able to connect And that's what is one of the amazing things and positive things about having a reconciliation action plan in your organization or your business, is that you can have all of these different ways to be able to connect with the Aboriginal community, whether it's locally or nationally, and use that as a way to be able to celebrate things like NAIDOC, Reconciliation Week, whatever it is that is kind of happening in the Indigenous space when it comes to any sort of celebration, even Australia Day, because there's still a lot of contention around what do we celebrate? You're black, you're white, you're half black, you're half white. What do you celebrate? Australia Day or Invasion Day? But if you don't have a platform or a framework or something to work from in terms of being able to talk about these issues or participate, then it's very hard. So, reconciliation action plans are a good way for non-Indigenous organisations to do that. And it doesn't matter if you don't know what you're doing. It's about the fact that you're creating something and implementing something within your organisation or your workplace or your company or your department that allows you to be able to develop things, to be able to interact. So, and that interaction can help with community engagement, relationship building, employment, other programs that are around celebration of events like what I've talked about, NAIDOC and Reconciliation Week and so forth, Australia Day, getting advice about how you can tailor your programs and services or your business to make it more, to be able to have more Aboriginal people in any kind of line of business, or to be able to get them to understand how they can participate in your program or access your services. So, and I think that what I found is that, especially in business, because, Aboriginal people are becoming more prevalent within the business sector, and that, sometimes even tenders within government departments will be asking questions about, when businesses are applying for these jobs or contracts or grants, do they have, there's certain criteria around what's your involvement with the Aboriginal community. Do you have any Aboriginal employees? Do you have a reconciliation action plan? It's becoming embedded in everyday mainstream life, and that places value on Aboriginal people and our participation. Whether that's as an employee, whether that's as a business partner, whether that's as a consultant, whether that's even being having that connection that gives a company the opportunity to say within their work and what they're doing with respect to their business, that there is some interaction with Aboriginal people and that they are making impact in a positive way. So I think it's really important, and I think as we go along in our journey towards reconciliation, that understanding the value of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in our culture will become more prevalent. Even if it is at the moment, the fact that it's becoming more embedded in business and that people have to participate, I don't see that as a bad thing, because in the process they're learning about Aboriginal people, and they will come to value our culture. And I think that there's this perception out there in contemporary Australian society that our culture is dead, that there's not many Aboriginal people around it. But we're becoming stronger and more educated and participating in every area: health, education, justice, business, in all the different areas and disciplines. And as time goes on, we're going to become more and more skilled, more and more professional, more and more successful in every area. And that's including the arts and sports and things, which we already thrive and do well at in anyway. So I think, I'm looking forward to a day when, us non-Indigenous Australians, all non-Indigenous Australians really value, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and our culture, and really embrace it as part of being Australian. And I think that's what reconciliation is all about. And we can never go back to the way that it was.
Yep.
And I think the word is kind of misleading when you're talking about that. But, we've been on this journey for over 20 years now. So we don't need to, let's not fix what's not broken. It's a word, right? But it's a way and a vehicle for us to use to bring people together. And that's what I really like. That's what I really love about it, actually, and especially when we're talking about business.
Yeah, one of the things that, and you used the word before, Boo, ignorance, and there's And as I recently was in the NT 3 times for 3 weeks, as I think I mentioned earlier, either before we started the podcast or earlier in the podcast, and I visited Nhulunbuy and went to the Cultural and Arts Centre there. And one of the local artists was actually talking about it, and he said, look, because I didn't understand that the imagery that they're painting onto, didgeridoos and other objects has actual meaning or language or something to it. I had no idea. And he said the thing is that, and I was showing a lot of interest in it and trying to get him to. He said that he said I see that there's two ways people can look at this. They're either willfully ignorant, so they're choosing to be ignorant, or they just don't know what they don't know. And when I look at it that way and as you're saying there about the whole reconciliation process, is I have not had a lot of exposure to Australian Indigenous culture at all. Like it's just not been something. Being born in Melbourne, growing up in Sydney. I started to get exposed to it 3 years ago when I went around Australia in a caravan. So it started to open my eyes to, okay, interesting. And there's this artworks and there's this heritage. There's, the way that the culture started to work, but only very surface level. And as you say, I mean, I think as people get more understanding, more knowledge and a feel for the culture itself, it'll build that respect. It'll build that thing of saying, wow, this is thousands of years old, this kind of tens of thousands of years old. This culture is just incredible. It's got this history. This is how things are passed down generation to generation, communicated. This is what art's about. And I think those things, it's that naivety, it's that lack of being exposed that I suppose just not knowing that is creating a gap, like an us and them separation.
Yes, and I think that's what I was kind of talking about earlier about being brought up in Darwin. Even the non-Indigenous people there, because I've been exposed to Aboriginal people and culture, they're a lot different to the people down south. And when I remember in my first year of university, in one of my first classes, well, actually it wasn't my first class, a few people had said in that first year, "Oh, you're the first Aboriginal person I've ever met." I thought they were joking, like seriously. And then after the third person said, I said, "Oh, these fellas are," and I felt myself, well, you ain't the first white person I've met. You might be the craziest, but like,
what's that like, Dion? Like, what's it? I had this weird experience when I was cycling from north to south in Vietnam in the Ho Chi Minh Highway, which was only just opened. And as I was riding my bike there, people would just stare, and they'd be on their mopeds, and all the Vietnamese for like 2 hours just following you, staring at you, and grabbing the hairs on your arm, like. And for me, that was the first time I'd ever felt like I'm the only one of who I am. Like and it was a kind of a surreal experience. What was it like when you moved from your family, your comfort zone? There's clearly something driving you to make these decisions, right? Because it's anytime you're going out there and you're being the only one, you're risking something. You're risking. So how do? I know you got a positive mindset, so clearly, you're a bit like me, Sean. Who gives a fuck if someone thinks something of you? But how? Yeah. What can you share with other people who might be afraid of that? Like, what advice would you give?
I'd say to just go for it. Like, I feel like if you just, because sometimes people are so comfortable and they don't want to leave their little space of comfort, but it really restricts you in terms of your learning and education and knowledge and experience and just your development as a person, as a human being. And I think even though I was driven because my motivation was to get a degree, right? So I would probably have gone anywhere to get that, and there was just less distraction for me if I did it somewhere else. That was my thinking. So I would encourage people to do it, because it's like, I never ever really looked back. And I'm not saying that Darwin is a terrible place. It was, like I said, had I not been brought up in Darwin, I wouldn't have had the experiences that I'd had that were so positive as a child, as a First Nations person, as a dark-skinned, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander man growing up in a place such as the Northern Territory. But even that had its limitations. So for me, sometimes it's about thinking about, well, where are the opportunities? And for a lot of our people, we need to move away, because you think about the mob that are in places that are in remote areas, like you're talking about Tennant Creek. Catherine, even more remote, Maningrida, Tiwi Islands. Sometimes we have to move away to get education. I'd like to see a time when it's there's more online learning, and the uptake of that is increased when we're talking about Aboriginal people, so that we don't have to leave our communities. But I think to develop and really grow yourself as a person, I think you do need to sometimes step outside of your comfort zone, and sometimes that means moving a long way from home, from your parents, from your family, from your friends. And it's not easy, but like I said, had I not done that, and I still have friends that are lifelong friends that I met whilst studying at university, both black and white, but a whole network of these, professional Aboriginal people now, middle-aged Aboriginal people that are so successful that that's good for business as well. So I think in that respect, it was a really positive thing for me to do. But some people aren't there. I've seen a lot of people actually take that step of faith, and challenge themselves. But it's hard. It's hard to be away from your support networks, and that's why when I'm talking with government departments where they're having these programs that might be around attracting more Aboriginal staff to their organisations in government, and they're coming from different places all around the country to Canberra. I'm telling them that that's fine, but you need to have support mechanisms in there for them. Line them up with an Aboriginal mentor. Make sure that they have access to what's happening with respect to Aboriginal celebrations within the community. Making sure that their managers understand a little bit about Aboriginal culture. Making sure that those non-Indigenous staff do some cultural awareness training. And try to understand what are the ramifications of an Aboriginal person living away from country when there's a death. Like they're going to be out of the workplace firstly because it might take 2 days to get home. And then in some Aboriginal cultures, the dead aren't buried for a couple of weeks. So that means that you'll be out of the workforce for that staff member's gone. That places more pressure on your team. So if you don't have an understanding of that as a manager, then you're going to be saying things like, oh, they're going walkabout. You know what I mean? Which is really derogatory and disrespectful and racist. So there's all these things that, non-Indigenous Australia has to think about too when they have these brilliant ideas about, oh, let's get some black fellas in our organisation. Well, it's not that easy. You can get black people, even getting black people to come is the first hurdle, but then it's about making sure that you're going to be able to retain them. And to do that, it's hard work. And it's not hard work as in it shouldn't be done. It needs to be done for success. But it's about having the time, resources, and investment in Aboriginal people to make sure that they succeed. And it's a two-way street. I'm not saying it's just for Aboriginal people having all the support, but it can be reciprocal in terms of the learning and the support and that journey. And that's again another good thing about reconciliation, because I think it's a two-way kind of street.
Absolutely. And clearly you've had an interesting journey so far, and there's been twists and turns, and university, and then working with someone else, then jumping into the entrepreneurial fire, from out of the out of the pan and into the fire or something. What's that'll do something like that anyway, whatever the analogy is. So the one question I have is what's something that you've learnt, or a couple of key life lessons in your time so far that you would go back and, if you were to go back and teach to a younger version of yourself, what would those lessons be?
I'd say probably to really embrace and use all your natural gifts, every one of them. And for me, it was sport. And one of the things I do regret, I know that people say, oh, I have no regrets. Well, I do. I regret that I've never used one of my gifts to my fullest potential. So I do lots of talking to students in primary schools and so forth too. And one of the things I always say to them is, when you go think about your careers now, these are kids that are like year 5, 6, going on to high school. Start thinking about what you'd like to do in terms of a career now. And one of the things that everybody has a purpose, everybody has a reason for being on this earth, right? And one of those indicators about how you can figure out what it is that you're supposed to do is think about the things that are natural to you. So if you're a good talker, if you're a good sportsman, if you're good looking, if you're good at art, that might, all of those skills can lead to something. If you're funny, you could be a comedian. If you're a good writer, you could be a writer. You could, be a journalist. If you're a good talker, you could be a reporter. Again, if you're a good sportsman, try, becoming a professional sportsman, but always make sure that you, and you don't have to go to university if that's not for you, but try to achieve at least the highest education that you can. So that base level will be finish year 12. If you don't finish year 12, go to year 10 and do a trade. Do something that gives you the ability to be able to participate in the workforce. And like I said, for everyone that's different. But if they don't start thinking about those things, like if you don't think about earlier on, if you're good at maths or you're good at science or and you're not picking specific, subjects around, furthering your career into the future that might get you into university, then you're going to be left behind, or you'll be like, oh, fire it, I should have done that, but what am I going to do now? So, and again, identifying those things that you're good at, are easy in yourself because you enjoy doing them. So I would say to people, identify those key things that are natural to you, that are easy for you to do, and maybe use them as a way to secure or work towards a career further on down the track in your life, because you have to work for a really long time, and there's nothing worse than dragging your ass out of bed every day to go to a job that you might not, a shitty job that you're maybe not getting a lot of money for, that you hate doing. Why not do something that you enjoy? Why not do something that comes natural to you, and that when you go to work, it's not like, it doesn't feel like work?
Because even when you enjoy stuff, there's always those days, right? There's still plenty of time in your own business and anywhere else where it's a shitty day. But at least if you enjoy it and you want it, it helps motivate you through those rather than give up the will to do it.
Exactly. It's like, I'm a good talker. So, and I get paid to go and talk to people. It's like, I love that. And they get paid me as well. So that's one example of how what I use to say, you can make a lot of money doing really positive things, doing something that you enjoy, something that you're good at. So that, again, going back to every day, you don't have to wake up and go, oh my God, I'm going to have to go to work today. I hate my boss. And it's like, I hate what I'm doing. So, and it might not be that you do that forever, but and a lot of people will do the same thing in terms of a career for their whole lives. But I'm talking to these kids, but you might chop and change like me, going from health to education to justice. Now I'm a business person, and amongst other things, being a father and whatever, and some of the things that I do, some of the programs that I run around, becoming a business person, an entrepreneur, and supporting other people to do that gives me a great deal of satisfaction and pleasure. And it's kind of like all the skills that I had being an Aboriginal health worker, helping people to access health and all that sort of stuff, and community development, all those skills that I've attained have now transferred over into business. And so I'm still helping people.
Yep.
I'm making money by doing that and affecting people's lives in a positive way, and bringing black and white people together through business. And there's all these, do you know what I mean? So it's like you might change your career path, but those basic core skill sets are still there that you really can be really good at.
Yep.
And you can use that in wherever and whatever you're doing in life. And that really is a key strategy for success. And so it's like a lot of the things and a lot of the achievements that I've done is like, really, they're giving me an award for what? For that? It's not like I was, going out to do it for that. It was just something that I thought about doing and creating, and it's cool, but you don't expect. But I think that's a real way to validate that you're on the right path, I think. So I look for those signs, and I always look for opportunities, and that's another thing that I say: look for opportunities. Don't let any opportunities pass you by. And if they do, look for another one. You know what I mean? Like,
there's always another one.
And always to believe in yourself. And that the only thing that will stop them from doing what they want to do to succeed in life is themselves. So if you tell yourself you can't do it, then no one else is going to help you to do it. So you have to, and I'm not saying that things are easy. You have to work hard. Nothing is going to be given to you. You have to work hard first, and then something might be given to you, but it's not after, you putting in the hard yards. And I think, especially when I'm talking to Aboriginal kids, that, that's really important for them to understand. And when I'm talking to black kids specifically, I say to them, understand who you are in your place in the world and how valuable you are, because you're an Aboriginal person, a First Nations person, and you are part of the oldest living culture in the history of mankind. And that's something that no one else can take away from you. And you need to be proud of that, and you need to understand that how powerful that is, and how important that is, and how important our culture is, and learn as much as you can about it, and share that with your friends, share that with your family, share that with your children, because we need to be able to maintain our people and our culture, and really promote that and be proud of it, and share it with others, because it's a really precious, valuable thing that other people might not understand totally. But if you stand up and be proud and understand that you are part of this oldest living race in the history of the world, then understanding that is a good thing, and it really can set you up in terms of being a confident person, and really being able to understand your place and your space and who you are in the world.
That's
really
awesome. That's amazing, Dion. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, you're irrespective of skin color and background, you're clearly a fantastic role model, and you've embarked upon that journey to become a holistic human in terms of learning, putting yourself out there, trying new things, and you embody everything that is being one of the few. And that wraps up another episode of The Few. Thank you to our partners, Afterburner, for team building, development and alignment. We understand now how important it is to have the right people around you. Get them on board with where you want to go. Momentum Media, the largest industry publisher in the country, connecting your business to the Australian community. ICMI, Australia's premier speaker bureau, representing the few that do fulfill their life's purpose. And finally, Sean's Inner Circle, the business coaching organisation for small and medium enterprises looking to make that next step. Thanks again for listening in and downloading today. Please leave a review on whatever platform you are currently listening to this podcast, and reach out to our partners who can help you make the transition to the few. Thanks so much for sharing your story with Sean and I today.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks
Dion.
for having me. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.